science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Salutations. This is ExoFathom, and I am Ayla, your host tonight. I am joined by my two lovely co-hosts, Nick and Mike. Nick, how are you tonight?
Happy Monday. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing fine. And Mike, how are we?
I'm losing my over here. Happy Margarita Monday.
Margarita Monday. I was about to launch into the greeting, and I suddenly realized I didn't have like a nice little alliteration for today that had to do with time travel. I kind of failed the show. We always do that, and maybe at the end we can figure out a good goodbye.
Do you want to travel back in time and start the show over?
Hey, there you go.
If I could turn back time. Yes, I would. And that is, did I even mention that time travel is the topic of the conversation? I don't need to, because that's the title of this audio if you're listening to it, or this YouTube video if you're watching it. And thank you for listening and tuning in. So time travel, the moment between certain points in time, or movement between certain points in time. Nick and Mike, when you think of time travel, what comes to mind? Books, movies, theories?
Back to the Future, obviously. The DeLorean.
Obviously. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep. That's what first comes to my mind anyways.
Mm-hmm.
My mind just jumps to Terminator.
Same. Absolutely. I actually talk a little bit about Terminator because that movie is very closely I didn't realize it until I was doing this episode, but there's a thing called the grandfather paradox. And I remember watching Terminator as a kid and thinking with my kid brain about how that all would work. And I didn't really know the concept of a paradox at that point. And so I just remember being like a little bit broken in the brain over that movie. Was that just me? Or
No.
I was too focused on the robots, the AI stuff to ever even consider time travel. It wasn't until I got older where I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing, huh?
Yeah. No, I know. You definitely did drink the Kool-Aid on that one. You're just like, ooh, machines, smart machines,
science.
AI.
Yeah, right. Years later, I'm like picking all my courses out in university. I'm like, oh my God, intelligent systems. I want to make a Skynet. That sounds amazing.
And so in like 50 years, one of us will be listening to this and we'll, be thinking, gosh, the inventor of Skynet talking so casually that time, and look where it got us.
Until some like Sarah Connor character kicks down my door and starts yelling at me.
I would love to be that character. It'd be all tough. Do you remember her one-armed pull-ups?
Oh yeah. I can't even do one-arm pull-ups.
No, I can't.
I don't know why you want to do one-arm pull-ups. That's asymmetry. You want to be able to strengthen both arms.
Well, but if you're hanging on a cliff and you just have one, hand holding, you need.
You're right. I do find myself hanging one-armed off a cliff quite often, and I think to myself, I should do more one-armed pull-ups
as you fall into the crevasse. Well, cool. Okay, so back to the time travel. Now, some would say we are all traveling in time right now. I don't know if that's a cop-out, but I think it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was talking in this talk that I watched, and he was saying that, we are traveling in time, but we just happen to be prisoners of the present in the eternal transition from the past to the future. So I think with this whole show, I'm kind of trying to figure out, what do we mean when we talk about time travel? And with the parameters of what we know, what's been discovered and stuff, does it match up? Does it count? what are we really talking about when it comes to time travel, and why does it matter? And why as a society should we care about time travel? I mean, right? Because like when we think of it, we usually think of an individual going back in time, but think about how expensive the first trips probably will be. How would we even decide who goes back and for what purpose, or who goes forward and for what purpose? And
Yeah.
it's not, it's not so much an individual thing at that point. It's like a society thing. And yeah, I'm just curious, Nick, what comes to mind for you?
No, I was just thinking that probably most likely the first time travel, if it ever does happen, is going to be like a millisecond in the past or the future.
Yeah,
And
no, for sure.
So, I mean, I think it's going to be one of those things where it's like, yay, we were able to send an electron into the past or into the future by a millisecond, like.
Right. But if we could, like actually transport a person to a point in time, past or future, do you think, like, why would we do that? Why do we care about that?
Well, the allure, I think, is just a human nature to want to correct mistakes. And that, time moves in one direction, and that really bothers us as humans, I think, because you don't get any more of it. You only get a certain amount, and that's it. And there's just really no redos. And, we're trying to create a redo. We're trying to do, like a reset button.
Yeah, but like, what's an adult without regrets? It's a child, right?
I don't mean to laugh,
It's just
but
a child.
What is an adult without regrets? I love that. And it is a child. I mean, in a lot of ways.
So like, I do get the notion that we have a desire to like fix mistakes, but then we just make whole new mistakes. It's human to err, right? But divine to forgive, and more of these like sayings, right? So I think even if we did get to jump back, we would mess it up in some other spectacular way.
Yeah, perhaps. I think, well, definitely what you're saying is correct. But I also think that there might be a level of transhumanism here involved as well, where, yeah, maybe humans will be disastrous to temporal traversal, but, some sort of hybrid human AI, thing might have an easier time at, accessing different points in time. I don't necessarily know if we need to be honest. It's like any AI that ever is created is going to have access to at least all of the recorded history that we have so far, and everything that's going on in the future too. I mean, these podcasts are a form of time travel if you're looking back at them. Yeah, everything on the internet is like a snapshot of in time. So,
but so is art too, right? Like any piece of art that you've ever made, or like even a song that you played at a certain time, if you record it somewhere, it doesn't have to be on the internet, right? You go back years later, isn't that also time travel?
Oh, it is certainly, but I'm just saying, like, if you were trying to see like a more probabilistic time travel, it would be via the internet. I mean, it's just the easiest mode for us to do it in. It's the most, it's the most effective. I would think that that's probably the best way. But yeah, of course, anything that you have, pictures are forms of time travel.
Oh God, pictures.
Pictures.
Now I'm just thinking of like
right?
Every picture you have of like past relationships and things. Like,
Burn
it can be a bit of usually like the plan.
There's that Friends episode where the fire department come in on Valentine's Day because like Monica, Rachel, and Phoebe are burning like ex-boyfriend stuff, and the firefighters like, this is one of our busiest nights of the year because everybody's trying to burn like their ex stuff.
See, that also makes me think too, would it be the best thing for an AI to have like a consolidated source of every bit of recorded history for its decision-making purposes? It might be too overwhelming.
Or it depends on the ethics encoded in said AI. It could just be like what is it called? Oh, like a blackmail robot.
Oh my God.
Well, maybe that's why the internet is increasingly becoming more and more censored. We're preparing for the AI.
I know. I
We
mean,
don't
I'm
want them to be
not
seeing
posting a
certain
lot.
things.
You do not get to see the X-ray of my jacked up knee. Stupid robot.
God.
Well, and that's funny that you guys talk about like hybrids and robots, because I didn't get a chance to look into this or think about it more complexly, but I wondered, especially when we start to branch out and start to try to um, push the limits of how fast we can go, how much gravity we can tolerate, how close to a black hole we could get while maintaining access to the data that comes from being there. It seems to me that the closer we get to AI and robots and stuff and robotics, then doesn't that mean that like space travel that opens up even more doors, because you don't have to care about like an astronaut that needs food and
No, that's the only reason we know what Mars looks like on the surface, right? Mars is
yeah,
entirely inhabited by robots.
it's so true. And that one robot that like sang its own happy birthday song to itself. Never heard before on that planet, and there it is.
I mean, I guess as long as it's not sentient, you don't have to care, right? But the second these things start to reach some semblance of self-awareness, we should at least start to treat it like a human, or at least
Agreed.
better than a human, like
Yeah.
a dog. We
True.
should treat it like dogs.
Yeah, and that's what I'm worried about with certain things, because even if the let's say like the Mars rover, it doesn't become sentient, but an AI does emerge and sees that as its one of its ancestors,
Oh,
and it's going to be like, hey, you did all this fucked up shit to all my ancestors,
Dude, no, that's so right. And for those of you listening, I had shared this video of an art installation piece with Nick and Mike, and it's basically this robotic arm, and it needs oil or some kind of fluid to be powered, but it's slowly leaking said fluid. So the arm's job is to scoop the fluid into itself so that it can keep doing its job. Once all the fluid, like early on when it could get all the fluid into itself, it would do a little happy dance, and humans would watch this spectacle play out, like in a museum or something. And over time, more and more fluid leaked out, so it never does its happy dance, and it's just lethargically trying to scoop up its last remaining bits of fuel before it inevitably dies. And
Yeah.
if I was a sentient, hybrid robot thing, and I look back on the internet and I see stuff like that, I don't know. My loyalty would be questioned for sure.
I might just see the whole thing as like just behaving very human-like, because we do messed up things to each other all the time. I don't think it would be any sort of cause to destroy all humans, right? Because we have a lot of good qualities as well.
Yeah. And I think too, like, I wonder if a sentient AI would understand that robotic arm did not have sentience, and so it was okay. Much to how, like, early theories of like ethical treatment of animals. If the animal's not sentient, then it doesn't feel pain, and you can do whatever you want. But then it's
Right.
like,
But that's the thing, is that we've already proved that all of those things are wrong, and we know
Yeah.
that
Oh, no.
animals are sentient and feel feelings and have emotions, and that plants that we never thought were sentient have sentience and have emotions and have feelings and can see, and can use 22 different type of sensors, and so yeah, okay, the arm right now isn't sentient, but I don't know, man. I still get really, really weirded out by it, because it feels like.
But
It feels like the same sort of the same sort of indignance that people get when they see like a tiger in a zoo.
Yeah.
Like it feels the same way to me.
Yeah, but there's we can get readouts of exactly what's running on that code. Unless you're saying like in our current day, any form of like silicone based anything is like has sentience. Which means like your refrigerator.
It's like the
sentient.
animus, or the animus sort of animism. Sorry, animism is the idea that everything basically has a certain level of consciousness. I mean, it's all made by the same energy too, right? So Neil deGrasse Tyson loves to talk about how our boogers are the same thing as stardust. Like, okay, so if that's the case, then all these machines are the same sort of atoms and particles that existed for millennia anyways. I mean, we're all utilizing the same materials, whether it's machine or organic. So I don't know.
Would it be sentient now? Because if so, then the ramifications of that would be that consciousness is just a simple computation.
Maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, as I said, I can only speculate. I would think I would be more concerned about somebody looking back at our treatment of proto robots and saying, I don't know if you guys are worth saving because this is how I was created.
Yeah, well, we are.
Or
we
if
can be
it
a
snitches
cruel
on
species.
us. Yeah. Or like, what if we shoot it into space? It time travels, meets some aliens, and the aliens are like, "Oh, what are you?" And it's like, save my robot friends. Like, I come from Earth, and it's horrible. That would be a horrible first impression of humans to aliens. So, and that's another thing, when it comes to time travel, if we are, because some of the theories talk about like wormholes or where you need to get so much gravitational and velocity based forces that it has to be like buttressed between two black holes right before they collide. So it gives me the sense that like you can't, even if you can go to the future, there isn't a really great way to like pop back in. You can't really do it a lot of times. And
Question.
well, before just one thing is like if we do send robots into that first, right? So let's say we're gonna do some time travel. It's gonna be between two black holes. It's really dangerous. So rather than sending a human on that first mission, we're gonna send a robot. But then doesn't that mean that if it succeeds, then that sentient robot or partially sentient robot becomes the ambassador for whatever exists in the future? And is that okay with us?
I mean, yeah, we would ultimately have to use robots in order to traverse like long distance space. I think that's why people want to merge with machine, because eventually it'll have to be a human machine sort of hybrid that travels and colonizes the universe and stuff. And yeah, so I mean, I think our first emissaries would have to be robots, just because it's the space is really tough to travel through. And as we've seen with the Mars rovers and all of the, the Hubble telescopes and all of the little rovers and satellites that we've put out, I mean, it's a really effective way of crossing those distances without having to sacrifice any humans. My question, though, was going to be, because we're talking about time travel, if we were to take a robot or a satellite and launch it in the trajectory, I mean, like this is assuming we would know the trajectory, but launch it in the trajectory in which our solar system is moving in relation to the universe, would it be traveling forward in time? Relative to Earth. It would be traveling forward in time relative to Earth, I would think. So, I mean, that's...
Yeah.
But I'm more curious if we go backwards. So there's a story by H.G. Wells called, I have it pulled up. Yeah, The Time Machine, which is pretty interesting. I only listened to like the first couple of chapters, and then my ADD brain jumped to something else.
ADD brain.
I have 20 books on my bedroom floor right now for that same reason.
This is why we're friends.
This is why we get along so great. Oh, look, a squirrel.
Robot, human, or monkey in space time travel, huh?
But it describes time as like like another dimension of travel, right? Like initially we could kind of move forward, backwards, left and right, but we couldn't really go up and down. It take a considerable amount of energy to kind of move around in proper like 3D-esque space, right? So why couldn't we do that within fourth dimension, within time? But I think though, if you jump back, you might end up knocking yourself over to a different like parallel universe where that time travel did happen. So this one would continue to exist, but that one would keep going, it would go another direction. So then if you push something forward in time, I still think you end up knocking yourself over into a parallel dimension. Unless that thing,
Mm.
yeah, unless that thing comes back to Earth, because there would be another universe where you never decided to do that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I
Yeah.
think I definitely co-sign that. I think right now the grandfather paradox is one that hasn't really been well explained. There are some alternating theories that are really technical and still have their deficits, but I do like the idea of introducing like parallel universes or yeah, I guess just parallel universes or multiverses, because if maybe a paradox is just a wormhole into a universe where it is so. I think that's what you're kind of saying, right? Like you could go back in time and kill Sarah Connor and you killed John, but you couldn't. However, it all we'll get
How
there.
dare you? That sounds
We'll get
awful.
there.
I wouldn't want to
It would seem
No.
like any. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, like yeah, you would jump into a universe where you actually did time travel. So like let's take the killing Hitler example, right?
Mhm.
We wouldn't wake up tomorrow and then find all of our history changed or something like that, right? Because we're in this universe where everything has happened within this sort of sphere or this sort of simulation or whatever the hell you want to call whatever you're existing in.
Mhm.
But the one next over, the one that you are now existing in, there would be a whole new series of events that happened. This also plays into the notion of there's like a scene at the end of Funny Games where they're having this real meta discussion about what they did in the movie and why movies don't actually happen in just some distant universe. And then you could get into like channeling, like what is entertainment to us is a reality somewhere far away in some other universe. So you
Yeah,
could
I
kind
could
of get into that.
imagine the cast and crew would create a pretty big tulpa, spend that much time and energy.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it would seem to me that I guess any sort of initiation of time travel would split off two different realities. One, I guess it would be a binary, right? Did it work? Did it not work? And so you're opening up possibility. It's basically like forking the road. Every decision that's made in that sort of space forks the road to yes or no, and both exist at the same time. And neither exists. It's like that quantum level. Yeah.
Oddly enough, you ever seen Mr. Robot? Have either of you seen Mr. Robot?
I don't
It's
think I've
on
seen
my
enough of it.
list. Yeah.
I've seen a couple episodes. Yeah.
So this question also kind of gets answered in a roundabout way too, and it's really interesting how they handle it. Because then you start to get into these things of like, if the parallel universes are close enough, can they collapse onto each other? Because now you have this interloper from one universe into another.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine like, how particles can attract. So then they're like, are these universes actually moving in some other bigger space, in some other bigger dimension? And are they, if you go to a different universe, if you time travel and you kind of broke the rules of our physics of our universe,
Mhm.
then would that start a Donnie Darko-esque event?
Ooh. I need to rewatch that movie too. Yeah, no, I mean, those stuff to make you go,
Yeah, so do we want to talk about time travel as in it all ties back to our one universe, or that?
Yeah, well, yeah, good question. So we can start with this first section, which I basically talk about, is it possible? I obviously kind of Googled it. There's a really good NASA article that just kind of lays out some of the groundwork for the possibility of time travel. They do mention that we are traveling in time now, and again, this is why I asked early on, what do we mean when we talk about time travel? Because we'll start here where we talk about the ways that we already do. Even astronauts in space right now technically are time traveling because they're going a little bit faster than us. I think it's like 0.005 seconds or something like that, if you're just orbiting the Earth. But then also too, if you remember, there's an episode we did on the time-mind connection. And so I bring just a little bit back of that, and Carlo Rovelli, who asks the question, is time even real? So once we get those two concepts, I think we can really get into some of these paradoxes and offshoots, because, to ask, is time travel real? And then you're like, well, is time real? And is time travel possible? Well, what do you mean by possible? So it just gets real juicy. So just to start off with, typically when we talk about time right now, we understand it in relation to ourselves. 1 second is 1 second. But when we look at maybe telescopes and we see stars and galaxies that are super far away, and it's so hard to imagine this, but like, we're seeing those stars and galaxies and what they looked like a very, very long time ago. And I'm just going to stop there. Does that bother either of you? Like,
Yeah,
every time
extremely.
I look at
Everything about it bothers me.
I'm like, okay, so time travel's not possible, but I'm literally watching the past when I look at the sky. Is that right?
Yeah, it is right. And so that was my question about being able to send something before the trajectory of the Earth in relation to the way the solar system moves through the universe. Because everything is moving away from the Big Bang. Big Bang is 0. And now everything moving away from the Big Bang, the farthest things out from the Big Bang are in the future relative to us. And the things closer to the Big Bang would be in the past. So what I'm saying is, like, if you were able to go closer to the Big Bang, are you moving in the past? And if you're able to move farther away from the Big Bang, are you moving into the future?
Dude, I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about that like unified field theory issue where it's like everything, like, we don't know where the center of the universe is. And assuming it's spherical, maybe elliptical, we could be orbiting at a rate different than the rest of the universe. And even though everything we take as like deductive logic, it's based on stuff that could be tremendously flawed, right? Because positionally it's like not
Yeah, I mean,
the
our
same
time
everywhere.
I still think you're moving forward in time, though. You're not moving in the past. You're just reversing a vector, right? Like, if we're flying out of the Big Bang, we just come up with these things as past and present. The reason why we're looking at the past when we look up at the sky is because light can only travel so fast. Now, if we start to beat the speed of light, then it becomes a question, of moving backwards in that vector. No, because everything would have to move backwards. So, like, if you had a ship that could move every particle in the entire universe closer towards the Big Bang, no, because you would still end up going forward. You're just reversing that vector.
So my question is,
reversing that vector. So
my
you're
question
still always
is,
moving forward.
if you could fly to the nearest star right now, if you could fly to it right now and you got there, would you be in the past or the future or the present?
The present.
Well, technically the self would be in the present, but if we were able to
traveler.
send a thing there, if it's there, because that star doesn't exist anymore. So when it gets there, there will be nothing there, but we still see the star on Earth.
Yeah, we have, it's just like latency. It's just lag.
Right. So is it in the past or the future or the present? I guess it's in the present, but then we would see it as being in the future because it's not observing the light that we're seeing.
I hear you. Yeah.
No, still all the present. That's why time doesn't exist. It's still all the present.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and again, that's where it's like, when we ask that kind of a question, is it a question Nick on Earth is asking, or the traveler while traveling versus the traveler on destination versus
Damn Einstein and his
so,
relativity.
If you're playing a video game and you're lagging, right, is the person who's shooting you in the face in the future?
Well, it is to
Because
you,
you
yeah,
haven't
because
seen
you
it yet?
see it, you haven't seen it yet. Yes.
But isn't that
like,
still the present?
subjectively? No,
Yeah,
but
but
subjectively, it happens to
positionally-
you a couple seconds in the future.
Yeah, and you're missing gravity in a video game example. You need to have a big old fat body of mass to really throw
Whoa.
things out of whack.
Gravity in this case is your internet service provider.
Yeah. Stupid internet service providers. Yeah. Well, I mean, no, this is really
I guess
funny,
the
and
answer is neither.
I don't. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
ISP would be the present and future, and both people are left. But you're in the past. I've trailed way off in this. Okay, sorry. I'll be quiet.
This episode's fun. If you're listening, I hope you're starting to get a little in the weeds too. Well, okay, so we'll bring it back a little bit. Because yeah, time. Oh yeah, well let's just mess it up. It's Monday, Manic Monday. Yeah, because I'm starting to really believe time doesn't exist. And
well,
this
it
is
doesn't.
making.
It doesn't. The only thing that we know of is time is just it's just heliocentric.
That,
So
but also
every time, every sun would have its own time.
So
true, but also causality. That's the thing that fucks us up a lot of the time when we think about time, is that like you can't study the rules of the universe without some sort of sense of causality. But the minute you start like playing with time functions, it gets really weird. And I think that's where like you have to start looking into like quantum, parallel universes, all that stuff that's like, I don't know, just like, yeah, just totally different. You just got to shift out of everything. But what were you going to say, Mike?
don't worry. Let's move forward.
Okay.
Or backwards. Wherever we're
Or backwards. All right. One step in front of the other. So yeah, relativity, you brought that up, Nick. So again, it's just the theory that says time and space are linked together. I'll say that again. Time and space are linked together. Einstein also said our universe has a speed limit, that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second. That's really fast. Now, according to this theory, the faster you travel, the slower you experience time. Scientists have done some experiments to show that this is true. Now, before I get into that real quick, the faster you travel, the slower you experience time. Is that why when like, no, never mind. I was going to say like when you're vibing high, you know, like people say time flies when you're having fun. So if you're having fun, you're vibing, you're doing good vibes and stuff. But then that wouldn't make sense because time should slow down by that theory. Anyway, did that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, because again, as I'm moving through this, I'm taking the word time and I'm like wondering, what can I replace this with? Or what does this correlate with if you notice these things that happen with time? So just to talk about this relativity concept and experience of time, there was an experiment that used two clocks set to the same exact time. One stayed on Earth while the other flew in an airplane going in the same direction that Earth rotates. After the airplane flew around the world, scientists compared the two clocks. The clock on the fast-moving airplane was slightly behind the clock on the ground. And so the clock on the airplane was traveling slightly slower in time than 1 second per second. Now, it's funny because this concept is pretty new, the idea that positionality can affect time, gravitation, whether you're high up in the air or low. And when it comes to like our GPS satellites, that's something that like our American Army kind of like set up and was in a lot of control of. And what is really funny, I was listening to this lecture. So U.S. generals were ultimately in charge of those satellite missions. They were generals trained in Army stuff. They weren't like NASA tech scientists or whatever. And so the anecdote is that the scientists were like, okay, so we're going to have these GPS satellites, but the thing is you have to calibrate it to account for those like time dilation issues or whatever. I forget what the term was called. And so the Army guy was like, that's BS. Like time's not different up there. That's dumb. And so the scientists were like, okay, what if we do this? We'll make two options. One that, will deal with the time travel calculations and one that doesn't. And so, for anybody listening who's like, oh, well, maybe the clocks were just broken on the airplane, or maybe there's some other force or whatever. Well, when it came to the GPS satellites, if the scientists didn't correct those clocks, you would see these huge, massive errors that would add up to like miles a day, big shifts in positions, and like the GPS maps were all wrong. And so that was another way to just kind of prove that like you do need to take into account this change of experience of time based on positionality. And I just thought that was so cool. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, it's that the representation of sort of relativism. I think what Einstein came up with certain parts of the relative theory when he was late on a train, right?
Yeah.
He was
Well,
saying
and-
like he was walking in the opposite direction the train was going, or something like that, and that affected his watch or something. But yeah, I mean, but that's the type of thing I was talking about when I was like, yeah, time travel probably is possible in milliseconds and small increments of time because of the positionality, because of it's relative to where it's being measured.
Yeah, and what's interesting though is that like that's just from on Earth and then like an airplane. Once you get to outside of the Earth, or if you go like, I don't know, like the further you go, the wider that distance is between point A and point B, and the way that gravity kind of like affects the two different points definitely takes that like millisecond up to possibly even like years. I don't know if I wrote it in here somewhere, but we might get into that a little bit more. But I just love this idea that like we talk about time travel, and on this small scale, it's already happening. Our satellites are time traveling, quote unquote, right now, which is dorky, weird, and cool, and weird.
There
Mostly
has
weird.
to be though some sort of like base value, right? Like if gravity is a scalar modifier of how time works, then there has to be somewhere out in space, whether it be equidistant to every object with gravity or just out in the void somewhere, there has to be some base where we can establish time. But the more we're talking about this, it does sound like there's a sort of locality, like planets are a modifier to time in general, and we just so happen to feel this quote unquote Earth time.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I am interested, like I want to start doing work on an episode on like the center, like the search for the center of the universe, right? Because like there has to be a center, I think. I mean, like where it all started, but like how would we even go about finding that? Does anybody care about it? Why should we care? And
Follow the radiation, I guess.
I guess, because I mean, like if you can get to that centermost part of the universe, perhaps that would be that like absolute time, that baseline, kind of like you're talking about, Mike.
Yeah, and then different objects would affect their gravitational pulls and thus affect time. Like if we could start getting sucked into the sun, right? Like all Twilight Zone-esque, then we would start to feel time differently too. Then
Yeah.
the Midnight Sun, I think, is the episode is called. Great episode.
Well, even like when dinosaurs were around. When dinosaurs were around, there were 370 days in a year, because we measure years by like sun go up, sun go down. And so depending on like how close we are to it, how fast we're spinning, like it all changes. And that's also really weird too, because I mean, we only have, was it 370? Anyway, I'm misremembering. But anyway, the point is that, yeah, like time, it's always changing. Even on our planet, we have little variants and shifts.
Well, you even have something called an atomic clock, right?
Yeah, and an atomic second, I think. Like there's a leap seconds, I think, is what it is.
Yeah, well, the atomic clock measures the electromagnetic signal that electrons in atoms emit when they change energy levels. So
Oh.
even atoms are displaying a mechanism in which we count time on.
Yeah, that implies
yeah.
that time is a tool of convenience for us, right? It's the way that we have to measure stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It just seems like it's all about revolutions.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, time,
Circles.
figuring out circles.
No.
I know it's an interesting one, and I think we can get into the question of like, is time even real? Because like, so Carlo Rovelli, he's one of my favorite writers and thinkers right now because he's part theoretical physicist, but he also loves like ancient philosophy. He loves like philosophy of science, history, things like that. And he thinks that time is an illusion. He said, our naive perception of its flow doesn't correspond to physical reality. And he posits that reality is just a complex network of events onto which we project sequences of past, present, and future. Now, he's in good company because even Albert Einstein once wrote, people like us, I'm guessing physicists, people like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Time, in other words, he said, is an illusion. It's, I don't know. My notes don't make sense there, but this idea that like it's really just something that is a tool to help us understand the world. And one thing I liked that Carlo Rovelli said, and this was a lecture he did for a TED Talk, I believe. He was talking about these clocks, one low, one high, one's faster, one's slower. He said, what if each of us is like our own clock on its own time, each of us experiencing time in our own subjective universe, and that the world is a choir of all of these clocks that all go at different speeds? Because then that starts to beg the question of like, when we talk about time, how much space do we allow for the different experiences of time? And if you have a comment, let me know, but I can keep going.
It seems like one of those concepts that, I mean, like, I understand where he's coming from about like the subjectivity, but it seems a bit deconstructionist to me because I'm like, all right, well, I get what you're saying, dude, but we also need to have like a consensus. You know what I mean? Like, it's fun to get into the theory and be like, oh, time's an illusion, man, but you're gonna get fired if you don't show up for work.
Mm,
That's the notion.
good point.
Of tool of convenience, though, right?
What?
That's what like it's again like a tool of convenience. Like it's an agreed upon thing that we both get to work at the same time. Now I've seen plenty of people show up to work on time and get nothing done, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've also seen people show up pretty late and then feel all in a rush to have to get things done. So then their time compresses to the point where they get a bunch of stuff done in a very short amount of time versus the person that shows up for that to be on time, so to say. Again, now we're like conflating the terms completely, but like shows up on time and then does nothing. So it starts to become
that's a productivity problem, I would say. Because if the person that was late was on time, there's nothing to say that they wouldn't have gotten the same amount of work done.
That's what I'm saying. Like if they showed up on time and they got the same amount of work done, then
show up to your job on time, you hippies.
you get twice the work done.
Right.
Again, like it's an illusion of convenience. And going back to like the Vale episode, sometimes you need those veils, you need those illusions just to get things working. And as a human, I think we do need that sort of illusionary state just to get stuff done, because that's how civilization works, right?
Time is the basis for all of our discovery in science. I mean, if we decided to dismantle the concept of time, nothing would work anymore.
Yeah. Well, time is a big variable in so many equations, and it's kind of funny because recently, or like not so recently, I don't know, sometime this century, there was actually an equation that was put out to explain physical nature, reality, stuff like that. But it dramatically excluded the variable time. And it was a really important equation because it was something that helped like mathematicians and physicists doing like micro studies and quantum studies. But I'll get there. To Mike's point, I think it's interesting what you bring up, this idea of like being late and working really hard versus arriving on time, maybe working slower, getting less done. You know, Nick, you call it a productivity thing. But I'm reading this book right now, and what's interesting is she talks about time perception. And, you know, as a society, we're like, how many people do you know say, oh, I don't have time for this, or I'm working like 70, 80 hours a week, or, you know, I don't know where my time goes. Something like, you know, there's this fast nature to the world. And I don't think it's a good thing. Most people, it's like stressful and leads to unhappiness because they don't feel like they have the time to do the things that they want to do. So this lady, she interviews like 900 people, and these are all not late to work hippies, but they're CEOs and pilots, college professors, you know, like people with positions of a lot of importance, busy people, put it that way. And all these people, she has them do a survey, and a lot of them are saying they work 70-hour weeks, 80-hour weeks. They don't have enough time for their kids. They can't do hobbies, all this stuff. I mean, some are fine, actually. Some people will say they have all the time in the world, and you could argue that's because they have the money for assistants to make the time, you know, those 4-hour-a-week people. But what she did find out was among those that reported having 80-hour weeks or 70-hour weeks, they were dramatically overestimating how much they were working. And and she said that like time and time again, participant after participant, she had them doing these time logs, logging exactly where their time goes. So let's say you do, you know, 3 errands in a day. The time logs also factoring the time that you were in the car going to point A and back to point B, time that you spend waiting at the doctor's office, time you spend in the shower, time you spend reading or watching TV. And she said that what was really interesting is that when you start to look at how you spend your time and you start to quantify, like she had a college student, like a really like a high achieving college student, and he found out he was watching like 29 hours of TV a week, and he was like, oh, that feels off. Especially when, like, according to him, he couldn't find any time to go exercise. But if you exercise like 4 times a week, that's only 4 hours of the 29 hours you've just been watching television. And so what she noticed is, it's like as people start tracking their time and they become, quote, mindful of like how they're spending it and intentional about how they allocate it, over time you started to see them discovering that they have more and more time, and they feel more in the present because they've scheduled stuff in a way that they don't have to like think about it when they're not engaged in it. And I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I would venture to say that all of those people actually did have the time. They just don't want to use it the way that they say they do. A lot of people would rather say, oh, I wish I could learn X, Y, and Z. I just don't have the time. And that's good enough for them. There's a lot of people who just say like, oh, I don't have the time to do X, Y, and Z when they do, but they'd rather live under the supposition that they don't have the time for it because it consoles them about not doing it or not being good at it or whatever. Yeah, so to me, it seems like a psychological thing.
Yeah, it's a psychological defense mechanism for coping, to not being the person they want to be. That's all fine. But also too, when it comes down to like knowledge work, this can also get muddled. So like CEOs, high professors, they often work problems out in their mind, right? And if you spend time, just because you're watching something doesn't mean that that input is taking over your knowledge space, or you're using your knowledge base to do things. I could be watching Looney Tunes, but why did I say it? I could be watching Looney Tunes, but I don't know why I said it like that. Was weird. But Looney Tunes.
Of all
Looney Tunes.
yeah.
But
Looney-
thinking about, designing a state machine, or I could, be
Mhm.
trying to understand positionally where the characters are to develop some sort of object recognition algorithm. I mean, you could be doing a million things while you're
Yeah,
spending time doing
multitask.
stuff. Yep.
Mhm.
Well, this is like
Mhm.
shower thoughts too, right? So this is where, again, like, we got to be a little careful how we describe time. And that's the thing. Like, I don't think we've set a definition on what do we mean by like time.
Well, let's get there. Because yeah, I mean, and just to talk about this woman's research, she also included like a mom of 6 or something like that, like busy people and like high up people. It was a good kind of mix. And I think what was interesting too about her study was that like she would say sometimes she would sleep like 4 hours a night, then sometimes 8 hours a night, and sometimes 5. And so she always felt like she didn't have enough sleep. When she looked at her time logs over the aggregate of a year and she kind of like averaged everything out, she pretty consistently got 7.4 hours of sleep.
Yeah, because it's social capital to say that you don't have time to do stuff because you
Right.
get sympathy.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's the thing is I think that like some people do want the sympathy or it's a nice out to be like, oh, I don't want to hang out with this person. I'm just going to say I'm too busy.
Or look at me, I'm so busy and successful that I don't have time for anything.
That too. Right.
Yeah.
And, but I think that like, what's funny is there are people who genuinely don't benefit from that. They're stressed out. They don't do the things that they want to do. And it's like by tracking your time, if you end up spending like 10 hours a week in a car and you want to learn how to speak French, well, then it's a no brainer to have like, Rosetta Stone playing through your, iPod or something like that. Are iPods a thing now or just iPhone?
People have iPods.
Are
Sure.
iPods still? Okay. It seems
They can be used as a modern tool of divination. If you have like a set list of songs that you attribute meanings to, you go to a walk and put it on shuffle. It blocks all the other distractions of the world, and it's a closed list. So
very true. Well, and like you were saying about having time to think about stuff complexly, that's research is called that fallow time. That if you have a problem, oftentimes doing nothing about it and letting your subconscious work it out, giving yourself that time and space, the problem starts to kind of get pieced together. Like your subconscious is always working on it. But you were asking about time. What is time? So I'm going to side with Carlo about it not being real. Now he talks about seeing the bigger picture. He's like, when you have a human, you just know that they were born from another human. There's a human before that. If you have a swallow, the birds, good chances that its parent was also a swallow and the one before it. So, there doesn't seem a connection between humans and swallows. But when you zoom out and you look at the theory of evolution, there's a connection. Similarly, if you look around your room or wherever you are listening to this, if you look around, everything's not moving. There's no poltergeist. Everything's sitting where it needs to be. And yet you zoom out and we are traveling super fast around the sun. And so from Carlo's lecture, he tells us that we tend to develop really simple, natural ideas about the world, and those ideas are often wrong. They're really good on our smaller human scale, but they're no longer good when we look at life. And I'm not talking about life on a scale of 10, 100, or 1,000 years, but on the scale of 1,000,000 of years. Or when we think about what happens really far away or with really very fast, very small, very big objects. And he talks about this concept of high-low. When something's high up, something's low. If I was standing in a room and I put my hand up in the air close to my head, I'm like, okay, that's the high level. I move my hand down to my knee. That's the low level. Works fine, but not if you move around to like Australia or the moon or a satellite floating in space. The highs and the lows that you're referencing don't exist in the universe. That's only appropriate to us here. It's convenient and useful to organize phenomena around us, but becomes meaningless the moment we leave our planet. And so,
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
right. But so what is interesting is to think on the past and the scientists who deduced truths prior to observation. So think of the black holes, the earth being round, the earth rotating, evolution, that they made these deductions simply by starting with the natural world and observing it. And, it's weird because it's like, okay, so what you observe in front of you, it's not going to be accurate when you zoom out. However, you can still observe its patterns to deduce some
Mechanics.
sort of knowledge. Yeah.
Mechanisms work, outside of the Earth. We can find mechanics that mirror, celestial mechanics down here.
Mhm.
Certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he talks again about this mathematical formula that excludes time. And he said that time is part of a complicated geometry woven together with the geometry of space. And his theories ask us to accept the notion that time is merely a function of our blurred human perception. When we see the world through a glass darkly, we are watching Plato's shadowy play in the cave. According to Vale, our undeniable experience of time is inextricably linked to the way heat behaves. In The Order of Time, is a book he wrote, he asks, why can we know only the past and not the future? The key, he suggests, is the one-directional flow of heat from warmer objects to colder ones. An ice cube dropped into a hot coffee cools the coffee, but the process is not reversible. It is a one-way street as demonstrated by the second law of thermodynamics.
Mhm.
Which I thought was weird. I mean, it was kind of cool.
Couldn't you just call that a measurement of time as well, though?
I know,
But
yeah.
he's
The loss
talking
of
about
heat.
it.
He's
But he's
talking about
talking
it
about
without.
like time. It's a heuristic function. Like it's a great convenience, but there may not always be maybe the heat transfer is bad because you get into like thermodynamics, but there may not be always a case where like causality works, like where like the evidence you have of the past builds into the future, sort of thing. But like it's a great, it's a great convenience for us to use to measure stuff with.
Exactly.
Yeah, it seems like a functional truth, and I understand the concept of like, of course, time wouldn't be the same in another solar system because the dimensions of the star are totally different, the orbits of the planets are totally different, everything would be different. But
think less truth, think more like a rule of thumb. Like
it's functionally true. That's why I said functionally, because it functions as a truth.
It's like a pragmatic. See, like when my brain gets all computer science, when you start talking about functions and stuff.
Mhm.
So, and I don't. Yeah. So, like, there might. Who knows? There might be a place somewhere in our universe where we know it as time doesn't even work, doesn't even happen. Should be kind of cool to go find out.
True.
I mean, it would be hella interesting. I totally understand the concept of time just being relative to us, the observers on Earth. I mean, I don't think that some far out distant place in the universe has to concede to any instrument of time at all. But yeah.
But so I just want to be careful when we start talking about truths, especially when we try to hold it to some sort of scientific rigor.
Yeah, that's why I said functionally true.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I like those distinctions too because he was in one of his. Sorry, I did like a deep dive of like Carlo Rovelli lectures, and I love the way he talks. He's this like pleasant old man, but he talks about like physics class, right? Like if you study that discipline, and he holds up a watch or like a pendulum, and he says, you study a pendulum. And he said a lot of physics is trying to find ways to describe, mechanics, the world, things like that. And he said, when you hold up a pendulum, it's pretty impossible to describe it without the concept of time. It is an object that's moving at a specific speed. There's heat transfers, there's movements, there's all sorts of stuff going on. Gravity's playing a role. But then he starts talking about describing things where the variable time is no longer a matter of convenience, where referencing an equation, the variable of time does more harm than good, where if you have this recognition that there's a pendulum, maybe it's like a microscopic pendulum, right? Well, time could behave a little bit differently for the pendulum, as well as the person holding, as well as the person observing. When you're trying to characterize what's happening, it behooves you to have variables that are static. And so he's basically arguing that, like, while time is a really helpful concept, it's starting to, on the fringes of theoretical physics, it's starting to become the high-low characterizations. High-low works in a room where you are and I am, but if we're trying to talk about, a satellite and the moon and Saturn and Earth, the high-low terminology does nothing anymore. And so he's talking about how do we get around that? And I just think it's a really fascinating idea. And I have another little section where he backs off of thermodynamics and he says, time as we experience it, a one-way street. He explains it in relation to the concept of entropy, the measure of the disordering of things. Entropy was lower in the past. Entropy is higher in the future. There is no more disorder. There are more possibilities. The pack of cards of the future is shuffled and uncertain, unlike the ordered and neatly arranged pack of cards of the past. But entropy, heat, past, and future are qualities that belong not to the fundamental grammar of the world, but to our superficial observation of it. If I observe the microscopic state of things, then the differences between past and future vanishes. In the elementary grammar of things, there is no distinction between cause and effect. And cause and effect are in quotes. As like Nick was saying, they're tools of convenience. They're what term did you use? Like practical definition, functional
It's
definitions.
functional.
Yeah. And so what he's observing is, in the microscopic state of things, it doesn't work anymore. And
Well, is that because there's no directionality?
I don't know.
Time is really about directionality, right? I mean, like our time is based on the revolutions of the Earth around the sun, how many times the Earth spins around in a circle. I mean, so if there's no directionality because you're in a subatomic space, because there's no subatomic focal point, then yeah, I can understand that.
There might be some perception stuff going on there, no?
As in,
like the very fact that we're perceiving time, maybe time has no actual direction at all, but we only know it as the set of revolutions, so we give it directionality. So every time it comes into this place where there is none, then we don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we still had the exobits, because I know he's referring to really specific observation or experiment, but I did not have time to pull it up. But we can definitely get into that a little bit more. But I just think that generally, when he talks about, there's no such thing as past and future, it really makes me think about that time as perception business. And I think there was an article somewhere where it was like time is an illusion, or time is something made up in our head. Even causality is kind of made up in our head.
So volume of events, right? Even causality. You have one event over. Is that like time series works? You have to define what your time is, but if you just took one like snapshot of the entire universe where everything's at, and then you move the universe a bit and take another snapshot of it, the distance in between would be what we call time.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, which is subject to flaws because there's certainly different instances where that wouldn't hold true, or you would have substantial error if you try to replicate that between two different locations, right?
Yeah, that's why you need a focal point, a reference point. And so if you were able to find the center of the universe, then you'd be able to take those snapshots and then be like, okay, here we go. Boom, boom. Because there's the center of the universe. This is how far the
Boom,
matter
boom.
has traveled between
Yeah.
this snapshot and that snapshot. But if there's no focal point, then you have no relation to what to measure it against.
Hmm.
But there's,
Yeah.
if you have no A and B, right? Because you can have, like, on a very small scale, you can always have some sort of focal point. But if you only have one picture, then you have nothing to compare it against.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, thinking about this, we talked a little bit about time dilation. According to theory of relativity, time measured along different trajectories is affected by differences in either gravity or velocity. And so I think I mentioned this before. The closer you get to the speed of light, you'll see difference in time dilation increases. And it is interesting too, because it's like, if I only went a 20th of the speed of light, there wouldn't be this big variation of time. But as I get to like 75% the speed of light, you start seeing like a big difference by year. So, for example,
What would a year on the sun be?
Hot.
yeah.
Well, certainly hot.
Good question.
It
Yeah,
would be
because
whatever the sun orbits around, right? Because we're all
Yeah,
traveling
right.
towards the black hole.
right.
Yeah, so I
Like
guess we
Camp
could
Marks
use the
Monroe.
galactic black hole as the center of our galaxy, at least.
Yeah, and then you have to scale out further, though, if you're trying to,
Mhm.
like, what is that galaxy orbiting
Right.
around? And then it becomes a series of offsets. You could build time maps to this stuff, I imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, they have did either of you watch Interstellar?
Yeah.
Okay,
I've seen it probably too many times.
is that the one with McConaughey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to watch this because I've never gotten past I've never been able to watch it to him actually leaving Earth. Like the whole time I'm like, this is supposed to be a space movie and he's just in like corn or whatever.
I think he's only I think he's only on Earth for like 15, 20 minutes.
Why does that feel like an hour? Like I feel like I've watched an hour of that movie and he never makes it out of the corn. And I'm just like, more freaking corn. But well, apparently, and the spoiler alert, I guess they get near a planet that's got 35% stronger gravity, and the planet is near a massive black hole or supermassive black hole. So it has huge mass, and gravity curves space and time and slows up time for the astronaut who's on the ship versus those who actually landed on the planet. And I believe they said that they were on the planet for 3 hours, and when they get back, their friend on the spaceship had aged 23 years. And what's interesting is all the calculations check out. Like we actually can calculate that.
They did that, to be fair, they
nice.
did that first in Lost in Space. If you guys don't recall, the Matt LeBlanc Lost in Space.
That one?
Matt LeBlanc.
Yeah. There was Matt LeBlanc and what's that chick's name? The girl
That's,
from Mean Girls.
Hold on, that's
The-
Joey, right?
Joey and Gretchen Wieners from Mean Girls was in it.
Gretchen Wieners.
Yeah.
Weird.
It was Lacey
a weird-
Chambert or whatever.
This is a weird
Um,
combo. And how do you know her name? That's like such trivia question
I
stuff.
think she was on Boy Meets World too. I have like all these 90s people in my head.
Do you just hang out on trivia night in bars? and
I think
No,
he
answer
does.
I'm
questions?
terrible at it, actually. I'm really bad at it.
Dude, the worst part is that like I swear I have heard him answer the question and I'm like, Nick, you know this, and he's like,
No, I don't know. Sometimes I know things and other times I don't. But no, I Lost in Space.
Sure,
Lost
things
in
have
Space
never been
had
said.
That's true.
Just walk that back. Sometimes I know things and sometimes I don't.
It's pretty simple, cut and dry.
Yeah.
Um,
You'd make a great physicist. Like, I'd love to see
Yeah.
you online.
Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no. Who knows? Just be on the fence the whole time. No, but Lost in Space had something like that too, and I always thought that was super fascinating because I think in Lost in Space there was a similar planet that had a huge amount of gravitational pull, and there was this ship that was orbiting it, and the crew was getting messages from the ship, but by the time they got to the ship, it was like 30 years after the messages were sent, and everybody was dead on the ship.
Oh my god.
So yeah, I've always been very fascinated with like
That's-
high gravitational pulls, and
That's
time.
why I've always believed if we come across planets with a different time dilation than Earth, we should just nuke it from orbit.
I agree. I think it's really creepy.
Just get rid of it. It's safer for everybody.
It really is.
But like, what if you could take a group of humans, like, and who want to go into the future, and you put them on the planet, like you have a robot pilot a shuttle. Shuttle gets to the planet.
Right.
They
You
get
spend
off.
6 hours there, and then you come off, and then it's 100 years later.
Yeah. Like, if that, like, dude, like, if
That's
that was a freaking option, I don't even know if I would do it or not. I mean,
It's
like,
a weird thing about the future, though, right? Like when I say I want to go to the future, I just want to be transported there. I don't want
Right.
to spend 6 hours on some planet that has waves taller than mountains.
Right.
I want to be thrown there and just be like, oh, look at it.
but
Right.
like,
And then when you come back from your 6 hours, everything you know is long dead.
Right.
You know?
Actually, that might be a pretty big benefit for me. That might sound lovely.
it's reset. Well, yeah, and then but, like, what would you do if you were like, let's say we're all here, right? And it comes out that Elon or whatever had piloted this special mission to some planet, and so all of a sudden we get some humans. Like, so I guess, well, let's see, it's 2021, so we're all like 80 or 100 years old, and then people come back who are our ages now, and they're like, "Hey guys,
They're only
we've been
like
on this
6 months older than when they left. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, like, a
I
human
think-
life is long, but it's not that long.
I think you get the jail effect. I think so. Like when, like the Shawshank Redemption, like he's been in prison for so long, he's
Yeah.
afraid of the world. I think whoever would come back from that would not even know where to begin to try
You'd be
to
an outsider.
comprehend. Yeah,
Yeah.
you would have to struggle to understand. And I think it might lead to some very negative psychological effects.
Or you buy what's the altcoin for Doge now? Shiba. You buy like 1 million Shiba and go chill out on some massive
my bad.
planet. Come
I
back.
thought it was called Ponzi. My bad.
right.
All it is.
It's some Ponzi coin.
Um,
But
Altcoin.
no, I've wondered too. Like, since we're throwing things in the future, like there's been some research in oxygen-rich hyperbolic chambers for the de-aging process.
Mhm.
So, if you de-age yourself by X amount of years, are you also time traveling?
Dude,
Yeah, kind of.
a little bit. Well, that's like the cryogenics question, because again, you can freeze yourself, and assuming in the future they can like reinstate your consciousness or transplant your brain or whatever, that's a form of time travel too, because
And this podcast is a form of time travel. People, I mean, unless the world blows itself up in the next 100 years, somebody might stumble upon this very conversation. Hey, how are you? How's the weather 100 years from now?
oh yeah, because it's
Yeah.
like 54 and chilly over here. That's weird. That is weird.
Yeah.
This could
Have you
be a
ever,
time capsule.
Have you ever listened to Welcome to Night Vale?
I don't think so.
So like a comedian sketch or
No. So it's like
know.
it's this like Orson Welles-esque show that an old coworker turned me on to, and so it takes place in this faraway town, and everything gets very strange, scientific-y. It's just like a radio broadcast, but everything goes really weird, really fast. But whenever they bring up the weather, they cut to like a small-time indie band.
Oh.
So, like when Nick asked about the weather, I was like, imagine if we just cut to like some music that we have now, and then 100 years later, somebody finds this, and they're going to find music from, like, imagine finding music from 100 years ago now, like finding 20s music.
Mm-hmm. Well, that we kind of did. I had a person I knew who gave us like 500 vinyl records that her father had, and like some of them I'd never heard of, and they were like pretty good. Fats
have some of
Domino.
That
think
sound
he
was good. Yeah, you gave me some Dolly Parton. You gave me a bunch of other stuff.
That's right. That's right. But like, remember those tiny vinyls that were like super thick, like the original vinyls? Oh, that was talk about a time capsule.
Yeah,
And
I
then you're
didn't get
playing
to.
them.
Yeah, I didn't even get to bring everything. I remember like I was supposed to make 2 car trips, but I was a
Oh
stoner
yeah.
in
Yeah,
those days.
there was so much. There were so many.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
I was way too much of a stoner to make 2 trips.
Which is like a 30-minute drive.
Yeah, it's too long. My
It's too
brain,
many. It's too many drives.
my
Too
thoughts per
long,
second. My thoughts per
or
second. It's so much that 30-minute drive feels like 5 years of my life.
It's the
So
gravitational pull.
yeah.
Yeah.
When you're on the 405, that's what
Yes.
happens. There's a high gravitational pull.
Yeah, those albums are real heavy too. I don't think I could handle that locality on the
Do
way
you-
back.
Speaking of heavy, do you think that like low emotionality, low vibrational energy vibes, do you think that that could possibly increase gravitational pull? So like on the 405, everybody's miserable and parked, and then all of a sudden like time goes even slower because everybody's just so,
And
heavy.
maybe a little like the collective thought energy drags time down a little bit.
That's kind of what I think, because like I haven't had to sit in traffic for a really long time. I like broke free of that paradigm, but looking back on it, it does
Have you
seem
ever-
like
So have
in
you
those
ever been
moments.
happy during those times? I've been like I used to commute from LA to Irvine daily.
See, I
So
don't mind it if I'm
like-
traveling that far.
But when you're happy, when you're stuck in those moments, time does speed up a little bit. When you're miserable, time does slow down.
Right.
So
Yeah.
misery is closer to the speed of light than happiness.
Well, because your thoughts might end
No,
up.
happiness is closer to the speed of light because
No,
it's
because it makes
moving
time
things.
goes faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be the inverse. So your low would be happy, your high would be misery with relation to gravity. Which I think makes a bit of sense. Like, because when I'm miserable, I tend to dwell on things a lot. But if I'm happy,
yeah.
I tend to go a little more no thought, a little bit more no mind, and I'm just experiencing the moment, which makes it go by faster. But I'm far more conscious of the moment if I'm not feeling great, if I'm like angry around. But if I'm like, if I'm chilling in traffic, I'm looking around like, hey, that guy's vibing out, that girl's smoking a bowl, the person behind me's mad, yelling at the people around them. This
That's
is actually
me.
pretty entertaining.
No, I know. I mean, like if I'm going a long distance, so like LA to Santa Clarita or something, I think for me it's like I expect it to take a long time. But for me, it would take me 1 hour to go 3.5 miles every day, twice a day, sometimes 2 hours. And so when you realize you could literally walk or bike ride so much quicker, but you don't because you don't want to get like jumped or hit or whatever. It's a level of frustration that like
But you're
if you live in
mindful,
LA,
right?
Hmm?
You're mindful. Yeah, if you're LA, this is actually can be very typical. But you're always thinking, right? You have conscious thoughts flowing through with the negative aspect.
It's been a long time. I realized very early on that I just cannot commute. So I changed my whole life and I don't have a commute anymore. But yeah, I don't know that I mean, so now if I have to deal with it, I've been taking waiting as opportunities to just meditate. So like that's what I do. If I was in traffic again, I'd probably do that, but depends on how long. I have like a threshold, I think.
Okay. Also taking a note too, according to your who's this physicist that you like that said illusion was a time?
Carlo
Carlo.
Rovelli. Mm-hmm.
All clocks are different, which ends up being true in computers too. They're all somewhere around 10 to the negative 9th to the 12th, but they can vary based off of manufacturing and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they have atomic clocks in a lot of those experiments. Same with like satellites. They have ones that we should do an episode on just how an atomic clock works, but
Again, all theoretical. Engineering, though, there might be a lot of practical reasons why that thing can actually perform to the atomic clock. And humans are engineered, or engineering practice is not. You have a theoretical human, right? You have like an ideal version of the self, but there's a lot of real human reasons why you can't reach to that scientific or ideal version of yourself. Also with computers.
I'm sorry,
get
you
what I'm
lost me.
saying?
I went from we went from traffic to what? I'm lost.
So like you have like you have like an internal clock. You have the ideal version of yourself that experiences time in the ideal way. But there might be a lot of engineering or human reasons why you don't exactly experience time in that manner. Henceforth, like the negative thoughts or positive thoughts.
Yeah,
Even-
hardware.
Yeah.
Like a clock that, internals start to, wear down over time.
Yeah,
Oh,
and the
yeah.
atomic clock would be the ideal of how you would experience time yourself. Like there's an atomic clock and there's an atomic Ayla.
Mhm.
And then there's the real Ayla that's close to the atomic Ayla. And there's real clocks that are close to the atomic clock. But there's tons of reasons why the two may not sync up at any given time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, just like there's a Mike clock and a Nick clock.
Yeah, exactly. So like Carlos said, they're like we all experience time just a little differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean it is a matter of perception too, because you can play with that concept of time moving fast or moving slow, but then like that just gets at that question of like if time doesn't exist and it's more like us just observing a placeholder, and that placeholder is related to like moving into entropy or moving with heat or something. I don't know. It changes stuff. It's like time is a pillar, and when you remove it, everything starts to feel a little bit shaky.
Yeah, of course you have to replace it with something, right? Like there's when you do problem solving or like in computer science, you have approximations that can be placeholders for real things. And sometimes the approximation is the best you can do. So this notion, this concept we're throwing out called time might be the best we can do. We may not actually be smart enough to figure out what components are broken up when we actually mean time.
Well, time will tell, won't it?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, no, I know. Well, and it's just like when you think about time travel across the board, it's kind of like going to the past isn't really something that's an option, because like, so assuming time is real and you want to like move back and forth between it, there are theories in place that can talk about going into the future. Satellites are already kind of in the future. Or like Eastern Standard Time, right? That always trips me out when like I'll wake up at 8 and all my people in New York were emailing me at like 4 a.m. and I'm like, So
Trust me, I understand quite.
yeah.
One
And
of them-
so
There's just a line on the earth that changes days. If you fly from New Zealand or Australia, you're crossing the international date line. So you can you can fly on your birthday and then arrive 24 hours on the day before your birthday.
one
We
of
should
my
do that.
favorite one of my favorite moments was I had a meeting in New Zealand with some people in Boston. So I was up.
Good luck with that.
Yeah,
Jesus.
I was up
Yeah.
at 3 a.m. to meet their 10 a.m. meeting
Right.
on the next
Oh,
day.
The day after.
Yeah.
oh no. I know. I had to plan like something with some folks in New Zealand too. And like, I just remember like out of sheer paranoia. Okay, so like every single email leading up to this, it's like, great. So for the event on blank day and blank time, parenthetical, which is blah 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 PST paren. Like every email, even if it was a quick thing, I would always just repeat what I understood the date and time to be on our end because I was like, no, like this is too hard.
That's a useful metric. The best thing to do is just shift everything by a day. Like, don't think about the date, but shift it by a day and then go off about 5 hours.
Mhm.
Then usually, as far as PST goes, you're in the right space because it's all one time zone down there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, I look it up and I just keep repeating it. And I figure if they don't correct me after 20 repetitions, then what I say goes.
Yeah, or they might be a little too polite. Like they might show up at the proper time and just not correct.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for putting that in my head. Now, because I can't go into the past to find out or fix it.
No,
But
but you can't travel through time, so
that's
don't
true.
worry about it.
Issues, man. And I think it's funny about talking about travel to the past because people talk about closed timeline curves. But the problem with those is that I think I can't remember the closed timeline curve. There's some issue with it, but with other past journeying, it requires severely distorted space. And so, again, that's like getting in between two black holes, which is extremely problematic because you could get spaghettified, all sorts of issues. And of course, causality brings us back to that grandfather paradox. If you go into the past, you create this loop of like all these issues that could happen that prevent you from doing it. But how did you do it if you did it? And blah, blah, blah. There's also wormholes. People talk about transversible wormholes, but it's not really a satisfactory answer to can we travel to the past? Because even with a wormhole, you can only really go back to where you initially created the wormhole. So, you wouldn't be able to go to like the time of the ancient Egyptians or something like that. And I think it's just interesting because time travel is cool to think about theoretically, but most often it's only about going forward. And the easiest way to go forward would be to do cryonics or to find a planet and chill out there for a couple hours and come back. And somehow that still doesn't really feel like the time travel we think of when we think of, Back to the Future and all that stuff. And then when I think about time being a matter of perception, how you speed up and slow down time, and I think I talked about this in the mind-time connection episode, with PTSD, you can have a very vivid experiencing of the past. And so I just wonder, like, do you think that there would be any reason to suspect that perhaps consciousness plays a role in the architecture of the experience of time?
I'm so glad you asked. That relates right back to our Red Planet and remote viewing on Jupiter series that we did, where we talked about the astral projection projects of, I believe it was the Red Planet Mars
With the
episode.
diamonds? Yeah.
Well, not just that, but I think on the Red Planet episode in particular, there was an astral projection document that we shared that talked about an astral projection, astral projector visiting Mars 1,000,000 years ago, and describing the terrain of Mars and what it was like and all that stuff. So the Army certainly thought that consciousness might be a vehicle through time.
And the Army did put up our satellites, which,
Wow.
well, that's,
Wow.
I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know. I'm not good with generating conspiracy theories, but I do think that there's something to be said for like our perceptions of reality and somehow like our collective shared experiencing and the way reality is so kind of like malleable, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, that was a illogical jump. That made a lot of sense. And then, yeah, like you were saying about, the whole PTSD thing, and as Nick was alluding to with the Red Planet thing, there's like your consciousness can be stuck in a single moment of time, right? Like there's this, I like the ancient Greeks, I forgot which one said it, but he said, "Are you so foolish to think that just because the sun rises and falls that times pass?" Like people can get stuck in one day for the rest of their lives. It's like an oblivion sort of situation, right?
Yeah.
And so to think that consciousness as it's a framework of our reality doesn't travel through time or can get stuck somewhere or can be thrown into the future. I think that's partially what happens with dreams. You might get, again, like as Nick was saying with the astral projection thing, you can get thrown. In some religions too, dreams are just astral projections themselves, but can be thrown to a different universe, to a different point in time. It could be parallel, it could be not. If you care about the effects of observation, then you can argue that whenever you remote view, you're actually changing the events that can happen. You're diverting them away, which is why a lot of the remote viewing stuff just doesn't happen. You can also argue that movies like The Terminator end up preventing an actual Skynet from being made because we've observed that future.
Oh, interesting. Well, yeah, and thinking about kind of Skynet and futures that maybe we haven't yet imagined, and time travel. Do you guys know about the Large Hadron Collider? Is that how you say it? Hadron? Hadron?
Hadron, yeah.
Hadron?
Good old sun. There's a few of them in the world.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing is like, thinking about time travel, and I'm doing all this research, and then I remembered that, and I looked it up. And for those of you who don't know, the LHC allows scientists to reproduce the conditions that existed within a billionth of a second after the Big Bang by colliding beams of high energy protons or ions at colossal speeds close to the speed of light. The collider propels protons, which make the relative time of the protons move around 6,900 times slower compared to human observers. So in essence, the protons are being sent into the future. And I don't know. I mean, we might need to do a whole episode just on that, but
that also kind of ties into like Mandela effect type things, right? The notion that once CERN started up, you had these universes colliding. So maybe those like particles thrown into the future.
Those are universes colliding into each other.
Exactly. Which then would imply that what was the Big Bang?
Just a Hadron Collider.
On a real level scale.
It's turtles all the way down.
Turtle Island, baby. Yeah, no, and I find it interesting too to think about like when we first started this conversation, right? Like, why would we go into the past? Why would we want to travel into the future? When it comes to the past, which we can't do, Nick had mentioned, right? Like a lot of it's about wanting to right wrongs or fix things, maybe help with the greenhouse gases or something like that. But then like on a psyche level, and I know, Mike, you've talked a lot about this too, like eternal recurrence theory from Nietzsche, this idea of like, well, why would you want to change the past? You should want to live in a way that you don't need to regret anything. You shouldn't need to change the past. And so it's just funny to me. Yeah. Well, like on like
regret anything, right? Be okay with your regrets.
Oh yeah.
Not change anything.
Well, yeah, like the demon that comes to you and says, like, would you relive it all over again, over and over? Would you do it the same? And it's like, you can achieve rights of the past by fixing your now to own the wrongs of the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but you shouldn't want to fix. If you want to fix the things in your past, then that's a problem. You should be okay with the mistakes that you made.
But you could argue, though, the way you get okay with it is by your actions in your presence, like your okayness with it now kind of thing.
Yeah, but you're
so well, you're talking about the Nietzsche stuff. I'm focusing on like the time thing, though, where it's like the correlation between the past and the present. You don't actually have to travel into the past to change anything about it. It's all about like the present.
Yeah, no, it's all about the present, right? You get reborn and you get to try it again. Yeah, but I'm saying too is that a function of a human plus time equals mistakes. So
Mhm.
you should be okay with those mistakes. That's the only. I'm
Mm.
being nitpicky with your words now.
Yeah.
That's
No, I know. And I'm like, no, because of time. But no, I know what you mean. But in the sense that, like, isn't it funny that travel to the past is something that's like not really proving to be an option, but existence of the past is being called into question. If time isn't real, right? Like,
Then it follows. If it's like all a convenience thing, then we really can't travel into the past, and therefore the past doesn't exist. It's just your brain making sense of its time here or the experiences along the way.
yeah. Well, and so like to Nick and I have had some silly conversations off the air. And one of them that we love to talk about is like, is the past really real? Like, we know our histories, we have fossils and stuff like that. But like, if you just suspend disbelief for a minute, well, I don't know. I mean, Nick, how do you really think about that in terms of like the existence of the past? Because I know you've
Nothing's real, man. Everything we assume is just assumed by some sort of power structure that fed it to us.
Whoa, that got Marxist
I know.
super fast. Jesus.
We're all talking about time not being real. I just took the black pill. No, but I do wonder that sometimes because obviously we know that we take so much of our information about things from quote unquote experts. And so, yeah, not assuming that there wasn't any past or anything like that, but it's really like, who's to say that, Abraham Lincoln did X, Y, or Z, except for the people who wrote the things that we decided were true. It does get very Marxist, and I don't necessarily
No, that's a question of trust of humans past, right? We all trust our ancestors to tell us the truth, even when they don't. So it's a valid question because you weren't there, right? You weren't actually. It's
a little solipsism too. It's like, well, I wasn't there to experience it, so it
I don't know
exist.
if you asked me about the past, I'd direct you to my exes, and then they can tell you all about my past, and it'd be fine.
Right.
But historically, we only have trust and then bits of evidence that again authorities have pointed to. So skepticism is good to question that sort of authority, but don't you always have to take your be doubtful and be doubtful about your doubtfulness.
Right. Well, I think it came from a conversation about the year zero and why we just decided to start counting, from that zero marker. And I'm just like, that's so arbitrary. Like, how do we even know that that's a real thing?
We're Christian based.
Yeah, I know. But still, we're people in 10 calling it.
Yeah, if you look at calendars around the world, the Mayan calendar, the Chinese calendar,
the
there's
Muslim
a lot
calendar
of different
is still in the
Muslim
1500s.
Yeah.
So.
Even if if you go that far back, that calendar was different too, right? Months were different. There might have been different lengths, years are different. So that's where you start to get to the whole thing that time is relative, and you start to dive deeper into that it's an illusion. But it's just all sort of this is how why is a foot because there was some king that was base a unit of measure on my foot. It's the same thing.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I think men and dinosaurs are walking the earth together and the earth is flat. So.
Dude, there's a museum where you can go to and actually see humans riding dinosaurs.
I love that.
Big facts
right there.
Well, isn't that how the second Dune movie is going to play out? They're riding those sandworms.
Sandworms, yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit different, but
cool. But for the Earth is flat, there's some issues with shadows and stuff.
There's a lot of issues.
But you start getting to trig, some basic level of understanding of trigonometry.
Yeah.
There's some problems.
There's a lot of problems with that shit. I love the explanations though, because like their explanation for why there are days and nights, it's like, well, the sun moves in a circle or like a figure 8 pattern over the plane, so that's why you get seasons and
I at least have respect for the Hollow Earth one, because then maybe Godzilla and King Kong.
I like Hollow Earth.
I do
Yeah.
too.
I can
would
dig
love
that.
that.
Yeah.
Like
Did
to
you?
dive in there and then find a whole like ancient prehistoric.
Hell yeah, Garth, man. Fuck yeah.
I'd be happy.
There's actually a show out right now. It's called La Brea. Have you heard about this? So the La Brea tar pits have like a massive sinkhole, and everybody that survives in LA is looking at this huge hole like it doesn't end. And everybody that fell in it died. But the thing is that everybody that fell into it fell into like a hollow earth where like dinosaurs are still like semi around. Yeah, it's crazy. I've only watched one episode, but I'm like, oh, this is nice and fun.
So you're telling me all those dead hookers could be found?
Oh man,
I'm Team Hollow Earth all day, man.
Yeah.
Well, since we're in like the fun stuff, I shared. I don't know, Nick, if you can pull up the photos. So I did want to just end this on like a fun note, because there's a lot of discussion on the nets and the interwebs about proof of time travel. And they go to proof of travel into the past. And so this is just some grainy photo images that I'll ask Nick to scroll through, just of people like on their cell phone in the 1800s. And I'm sure like the photos are doctored. I'm sure. But you can, like, if you want to amuse yourself, look up, I don't know, proof of time travel and see what you get, because it's pretty funny.
I actually like these a lot. I've seen a lot of these photos.
Mhm.
And but look, if you have parallel universes, then this can kind of still hold true, right?
You know
That
what,
means
honestly.
somebody in the future from some other timeline jumped to our timeline and has pushed our point of tech and civilization to where it is now.
Well, yeah,
So
and like
if
the
you
pictures
can-
of some of these people, like you could totally see it being like some guy like named Jimmy in his parents' basement, just accidentally time traveling and being like, "Oh shit!"
Could you imagine the panic if you time traveled and you didn't know exactly how you did it?
Oh, I know. Seriously.
And you went back to a point where you couldn't return?
Yeah.
Just hope that you would have your phone on you.
Yeah, for that
Be a
little
wizard.
bit of battery to like, connect to some invisible place.
Right. Right. Well, and so the first one, it doesn't even go back that far. It's 1995, and somebody's got a smartphone with a Mike Tyson versus McNeely boxing match. So I'm sure there's probably video too, but I just think that's a really funny example, because like, yeah, if a parallel universe thing is real, or maybe the Hadron Collider is mixing all kinds of stuff up, who knows? But like, you can keep scrolling, Nick. There's another photo. Let's see, Charlie Chaplin movie. They've got a picture of a guy holding his hand to his face. He could just be scratching himself, but they're saying he's talking on the phone.
We have to set up better guidelines. Like, we have to have rules if we time travel. When we get there, and if we can do it, we have to be like, all right, no phones. You got to dress up.
Yeah. Well, maybe these people are on vacation. Maybe we did figure out time travel, and all these people are just taking vacations.
Well, right. And that would make sense if in like 3021, yeah, we figure out time travel and they start it, then there would be a point to which we would see more of this. Is that actor?
But then the TTSA would have to ban some items, right? Like, I can't carry shampoo on
no
an airplane.
Anachronisms. Yeah.
Right.
The Time Travel Security Association. Yeah.
This one's the most convincing one I've seen before, because
the London Bridge.
Yeah, because he's like clearly wearing a t-shirt and like a hoodie.
I know.
Or like a zip-up cardigan or something, and he's got like wraparound sunglasses, and
no hat. All the
He looks
gentlemen are
very
wearing.
modern. Well, I mean, there's some guys
He's
that aren't wearing hats,
tall.
but they're all wearing suits. They all have the side part thing. He looks like he's bedhead, like, just like some scruffy bastard.
He looks like he's wearing those ultraviolet light sunglasses, those color blockers, and maybe he was meditating and he's like, uh-oh.
And he clearly has like a logoed t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Yo,
Like
my
that.
bad.
I don't know. Yeah.
My bad.
My bad.
I didn't know that picture was being taken. I was
Right.
just really hungover.
Okay, what's the next one? Like, this one's a man from 2256. A 44-year-old man was arrested in Toronto, January 2003, by the FBI. He was detained on the suspicion of illegal inside information on the stock market. He invested just $800 and made out with $350 million. Very high risk investment. And he made about 126 high risk trades, and he never lost a single cent. During the 4-hour confession, he stated that he came from 2256. In fact, the FBI did not get any evidence of fraud from his side. And on April 3rd, 2003, so same year, just a couple months later, an unidentified person came into the courtroom for a bail hearing and deposited $1 million for the bail of this guy. But after, they disappeared in the way and never have been met again. Later, the FBI could not find out where both of them came from and where they went. Okay, that's legit creepy.
Do you think there's like an adjustment bureau type thing?
Dude, that would be so cool. I bet. Yeah,
Although if this guy is from 2256, our gene pool is sorry. Why?
Yeah, at least he looks human.
Maybe that's why he wanted
He
the
does kind of
money.
look human, but like 200 years from now, everybody should be like Chad's.
No. Our gene pool is not like that. It actually works. Have you seen Idiocracy?
I know.
He said they should all look like Chad. Oh man. Well, maybe he was trying to get money so he can do the Chad upgrade.
Or maybe there's like a scanner darkly thing happening, where it's like a.
He does kind of look like another dimensional Alex Jones, a young other dimensional Alex
So
Jones.
great.
Yeah.
No. It's Alex Jones, but he went to a planet for a couple hours, and the side effect is that your face melts a little bit.
Oh my God.
There's also a Swiss ring watch that was discovered in a tomb in China. The tomb was made from the Ming Dynasty, and it was of 400 years old. But the ring-like object, it was a small watch, similar to a modern Swiss watch that was only 100 years old.
So the grave robbers went for it 100 years ago.
Must have been. I mean, that doesn't seem as convincing.
Did you leave your ring watch?
Who has a ring watch?
I know, that is such a weird novelty.
That's so weird. There's a 1,500-year-old mummy
Shut the
wearing
fuck up.
Adidas sneaker shoes.
So like the.
It's just fucking stripes. What are you talking about? It's not even they're not even the Adidas stripes.
Maybe fashion. Well, I see like the 3, right? But like
Yeah.
maybe fashion design takes like a really bad turn in the future. Like architecture between like the 60s and 80s. Like maybe there's just some really bad period in the future.
Perhaps. This is a Mongolian mummy. Oh man. Yeah, so that's pretty self-explanatory. There's a 17th century astronaut. What?
Yeah, that one's weird.
That's a Banksy piece. I don't believe that's
Right.
That's not right. Yeah, there's a what?
It's an astronaut sculpture in Spain from the 16th to 18th century. Shows that the technology was invented after, the tech was invented in 20th century.
So
But yeah,
maybe-
the sculpture is of a dude that clearly looks like he's wearing some type of suit and a helmet.
Yeah, with a
With a breather.
or something.
Yeah.
But like we've had this talk where like artists and poets and these sorts of folks might be able to pull from the fifth dimension a lot easier. So they might be getting visualizations of the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. The sculptor just remote viewed into the future.
They can. That's what
Yeah.
scrying is.
Right.
Sure.
Right. I
Divination.
mean, yeah, no, and I mean, like, that's kind of, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the whole point of this particular episode is that time travel
So
is just, the more you think about it, the less you know.
yeah, there's one about a really famous story about this guy who ends up in an airport with a passport from a country that doesn't exist. And I think he was speaking a language that wasn't spoken. He was like getting really fresh, like a lost in translation type thing, but only the base country straight up doesn't exist.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then
Oh.
some years later, or like some time later, he just vanishes. Nobody knows where he went. Nobody knows what happened to him. But like the passport was legit, and it seemed like the language was legit. So like everything was in place, but he like accidentally stepped into a different dimension.
Oh.
And it was like in like yeah, it was like in a country from like Central Europe. Like it was a place with high where there's like a lot of wars that happened in the past, which gives high volatility to past events, right? So like maybe somewhere along the line a country sprang up where it wasn't before, and then he ended up being transported here somehow.
Ooh. Yeah, that's an uncomfortable anomaly. And I mean, I think that's the thing too, is that like we've spent so much time trying to find, I don't know, like you're saying, tools of convenience, things that are more often than not correct. But when an anomaly comes along, we sweep it under the rug, or we say, oh, we'll study that later, or that just needs to have better research parameters or something like that. But, you know, I do like that the scientific community, there's starting to be a lot more physicists and thinkers who are starting to look at anomalies and wonder like, maybe we need to throw time out and create new terms, or, you know, go micro or something.
Yeah, you have to at least. The problem with throwing out time is that it's such a good heuristic, it's such a good rule of thumb or functional truth.
Well, for us on Earth, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it fits really well with solving equations, like doing the work that's required to make things that work in physical reality, right? So the second you remove time, you add a whole level of complexity that may take generations just to replace.
I know. And the question is like, is it worth it, right? Like if we assume multiple generations to unravel stuff and then we figure it out and like functionally we're no better off than when we had the concept of time, what would be the point?
Exactly. Well, hopefully you get a little closer to absolute truth. But it's like the same thing with Interstellar, right? Like the whole time Matthew McConaughey's kids trying to figure out how to get him back to Earth because she loves him and wants to see him. And she realized that her mentor had been working with this like a hand tied behind his back because he was respecting gravity. And that becomes like the lynch point, the key point. Sorry, been drinking. My words are slipping.
The thing that holds you back.
Yeah, it becomes a thing that holds the whole story back, right? Like the second she disregards gravity, which we don't know that much about, in all honesty, the math works and the theory works, and they're able to get the equation and humans off of the ground and moves everything forward. This could be the same thing with time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, even, you know, and I do think it's going back to what Carlo was saying, is that like our ability to observe natural events and then make pretty accurate deductions and then test those and see them come true, it's pretty remarkable. Again, you know, I think it was the Hubble telescope episode, Einstein conceived of stuff 100 years before it was proven. It's freaking crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, I like to think though with time though, like if you jump into that camp, if you jump into the time doesn't exist,
Hmm.
It gets very difficult to navigate waters because, as Nick said, you got to show up to work on time. You have responsibilities. You have to do. You have to be functional in society, right? Or in
Yeah.
civilization. So, like, I like to behave like time doesn't exist, but respect other people's time when they come into my world. And I think that's the very best you can do if you really think that time is an illusion, which I do.
Well, or maybe just scale it. So the further out you get, the bigger things get, the more it's an illusion. But within close proximity, yeah, it holds
Other
up.
way around.
What?
The
No,
further out you get into other systems outside of yourself, the more time needs to be concrete. You can live in a world where time doesn't exist within yourself. Totally fine.
No. So, to both your points. So, yeah, within yourself, you can. When it's really close, you should pay special importance, like with your immediate supervisor. But to managing department, like much higher up, if you're good at rhetoric, you can spin stories to buy yourself more time and then behave like time doesn't exist and rely on your rhetoric skills to buy you said time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I just think that as you scale out to larger networks of collective groups of people, you need to make time more concrete because it's an
and
organizational structure. So
got it. And
Yeah.
I was thinking zoom out like, multiple universes. And
Oh, you were
I
thinking
zoomed
no
That's a
in.
when
far
it comes
zoom.
yeah, multiple universes like that. Like that's interesting. Like yeah, it's where you cap where the edge of your universe is. It's like a
Mhm.
subspace structure or a sub matrix structure. Because matrices can work like this too. You might have so like ideally you would find some sort of characteristic equation that works along all rows of your matrix. But there's some things that can work best in like the first and second kind of sub matrix, or like the 2 by 2 sub matrix, and then there's things that work in the n by m matrix, and that's kind of what you're looking for. Like yeah, locality matters, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think, thinking about that, and I guess this will be just like a final thought because we are close to 2 hours. Oh my God. Um,
You want to go
that
for another
time
4?
flew. I mean, shoot, it will go by in a blink of an eye. But I was just going to say, like, when you think of like solipsism and you think about the idea of like reality is uh, what are they calling it now? Like a simulation theory. And you wonder, like, okay, well, if the things that I understand become more true, the more proximal they are to me, does that, and if my perception shifts my experience of it, then does that maybe lay more groundwork for solipsism and
You're missing a part of the feedback loop though, right? Because if things are more true when it's proximal to you, it's reliant on the other person agreeing with you to the truth.
Mhm.
Right. So if you're enforcing the idea that your supervisor doesn't care about time, so you show up late all the time, and that supervisor fires you, that's then again a regression within the solipsis philosophy, because it wouldn't, unless you want to argue that your subconscious wants you to be fired.
Well, I don't know.
Sometimes works.
I was thinking more about the idea that like truth only exists in closed systems. So when we were talking about time, it got confusing because I was zooming out super far and Nick was zooming out planet far, and there was a misunderstanding of the extent of that zoom. And so it made me think about like closed systems, the more I zoom in, the closer I'm getting to truth. And that's why I was wondering, like, if you zoom all the way into like just me, would that be like,
Yeah, but
but it's
truth
been a minute
only.
since I've studied solipsism, so I
But
don't know.
if truth only exists in the closed system, and you're the closed system, then yes. But you're playing with the notion of truth.
Yeah,
I think you're playing more with the notion of truth than you are playing with the notion of solipsism.
got it. No, that makes total sense. Well, my brain is tired, guys. I think that was a good chat. Did you want to add anything to time travel discussions or?
If you could travel to any period of time and be a fly on the wall, just be an observer, you would not be noticed. You would not have any photos.
Okay.
What period of time would you travel to?
Ooh, I would like to go to the time when language first developed. I want to see how that happened.
Nice.
Hey, if that's it, I will be.
That's how it happened.
Are you sure you want to see
was,
what's going on when that
pointing.
happens?
I guess. No, I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, I guess it would be a slow
That's-
evolution.
But that's actually that's a good one though. What if it's like somebody like doing a cave painting? Would you be okay with that?
I think so. Hieroglyphs and such, and see how they communicate that. I don't know.
Nick?
It's a really good question. I guess like if I said that there's two different points, so like I'm trying to think of like if I wanted a human experience, it would be, I don't know, I would say like I'd like to
Jesus.
see I'd like to see like I'd like to see the pyramids being built or something like that. But if it was like an Earth event, I'd love to see either the Yucatan asteroid impact or the Younger Dryas glacial melt. That would be pretty cool.
Did you want a second X? Because that sounds like a human event, Ayla. Did you want the like the geo?
Oh,
the Earth
the
event?
geoplanetary event. Yeah, and then if that's it, then I guess I'd want to see dinosaurs walking the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
I love dinosaurs.
Any particular period?
Jurassic.
The Cretaceous got the best dinosaurs. So goes wrong.
I knew Nick was going to say something.
I was like, you know what? I read Jurassic Park. I read Jurassic
Should be
Animals.
called Cretaceous Park.
Right.
All of those
I
were
know.
Cretaceous period.
Fucking right. I failed. I remember that.
That's what we call the Socratic setup, Ayla. You were the fall person.
No, I had plenty of time to Google, but I'm like, we're at 2 hours. Ain't nobody. No. I'm tired.
What about you, Mike?
Brain off.
Resurrection of Christ.
Oh, the resurrection. Okay.
Yeah, I want to see if this dude actually got up from the dead. I want to just see if it actually happened.
He's just taking a really long nap.
Yeah,
right. They buried so many people who weren't really dead. It was effed up. Like, you know how they would test if you were dead?
Right?
Yeah, but no. Okay, you could be like hungover, right? And if somebody were to like poke a needle in your ear and you didn't respond, bury you. Like, the ways that they tested for dead were so not right, and so many coffins had claw marks. So I mean, yeah, okay, good.
Welcome to being human. Yeah, maybe I help Christ get out of that.
Change history.
And then I want to see the crossing of the Bering Land Strait.
Nice.
That would be really dope to see, because then you know a lot more.
Oh, okay. I take it back. I want to see the human bottleneck. That's what I want.
Yeah.
We only have like 10,000 people. There's like one man for every 17 women. What the hell? I read that and I was like, oh my gosh. And like Nick was telling me how, like, when you see a lot of people that look alike, it's like because humanity got down so low. Like,
I think like 70,000 worldwide.
That's
because
insane.
of the Toba supervolcano explosion.
That's not even as many people in Los Angeles.
I thought that was just procedural generation of NPCs.
Yeah.
Right? So many theories. Oh man. Well, great question, Mike. And thanks to both of you for the lively dialogue. I definitely have a lot to think about. We should definitely do like a follow-up talk about the Hadron Collider and anything else that comes up. And for those of you listening, thanks for joining us. Leave your comments below about whether you think time is real or fake. And if you have any links to proof of time travel, do share them. But yeah, thanks for spending your time with us.
Mhm.
And all you hippies, show up to work late.
That's right.
Yeah,
No.
Don't.
done.
Hey.
I got it.
Get a job first and then show up on time.
Just show up at some job. Hey, I'm here on time. Come on, give me some work.
All right. Well, thanks, Ayla. That was a fun conversation.
know.
Very much appreciate it. And we appreciate all of you out there for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. I know I certainly did. Please feel free to give us a follow and a subscription to our YouTube page at Exofathom. That would help us out a lot. We are on Verbal as well at Exofathom for you audio listeners. We are also on Rumble and Odyssey at Exofathom. So be sure to check us out there. But until next time, Cognauts, you stay out there and we'll catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.